literally got everything you need to analyze music in common practice. Baroque period, classical period, Romantic period. You've got all the tools. So there will be mystery chords and challenges, but you've got the vocabulary that you would need to analyze anything. So what we're talking about now, the 20th century, will not be on the final. As I've mentioned several times, when I took this using the second edition of Ottman, it was a much smaller book. It had nothing about the 20th century.
And how small chapter 14 was back then?
It was just clear like cellophane. But when I went on to study 20th century music, to me it seemed like all of a sudden a switch was flipped and everything was atonal. And it wasn't for years listening to a lot of pieces that I could finally see, no, really music kind of gradually turned atonal. But I suppose he's doing this to connect it. So in the 20th century, melody, modal derivations. If you turn to page 402, Ralph Vaughan Williams, or Ralph Vaughan Williams from England, wrote Fantasy on the theme of Thomas Tallis. Tallis was a Renaissance composer. So this is a mode. So Vaughan Williams took the modal melody. He had some very interesting rhythmic things. Remember, if Tallis is British, they're anti whatever the Germans do, and the Germans turned atonal. So the British kind of turned to modality, just because they didn't want to do what the Germans were doing. Similar as Benjamin Britten at the bottom of the page.
Is that because of what was going on with the wars and everything too?
It was
have
just
a play to
cultural.
it?
I mean, Britain and Germany didn't get along at all anyway. But I mean, this earlier World War I was over began in 1914. So even back then, they weren't getting along. So they must not have been getting along before that. Germany has a history of not getting along for some reason. When you declare war, kill millions of people, they don't like you anymore. But just culturally, you couldn't get the British to wear German fashions, drive German cars. So it's natural that the composers were not going to pick up on what the Germans did musically. Page 403 at the bottom of the page, non-tonal melody lines. So setting up a scale or something that doesn't really give you a key. There's a good example at page 404 at the top, Hindemith. Hindemith wrote an opera called Mathis the Mauler, Mathis the Painter. And it was a big hit, so he wrote a symphony called Mathis the Mauler, which used themes from the opera. So he was kind of cashing in on the popularity. But what the author of the book is trying to point out is he's really using traditional things like an arpeggio in thirds, but he's lining it up so it's not coming out traditional. So the violin or the strings make this statement. So for a second there we see G, B flat, D. Second, third, and fourth notes. That's a G minor triad. But he follows that with E flat, G flat, B flat. Okay, that could be a chromatic third relationship. But then an A and an E and a B. You know what that is? So he's trying to try all 12 tones in the music.
I love the way it's C question mark.
Yeah, and then a D flat question mark. So he's got like hints of a C triad or a D flat triad or an E triad, but there's always something in the way that keeps us from saying, yeah, that's a C or that's a D flat or that's an E triad. William Schumann at the bottom of the page. William Schumann was an American. If you look at this melody, it's hard to tell what key you're in. He seems to be freely going from sharps to flats. And so he's kind of developed an artificial scale where he's just, and that artificiality, it looks pretty traditional, but it doesn't sound very traditional. I mean, the shape of it is traditional, but he's got, that sounds pretty good, but then, never can't seem to find a key. And then you get a great experiment here on page 405, Bela Bartok. You played some of his duets. But what he's got is the treble clef is in F minor, or maybe F Dorian. But the bass clef is in A minor. So he's got two different keys going on.
Yeah.
And he did this a lot with he had a series of violin duets. Did you ever do it?
That's what we did, was his violin duets that we
Did you
had
do one that was in two different keys?
Um,
So it's interesting because imagine, let's see.
I don't know, because Sam was playing it on E flat saxophone, so I can transpose to B flat, but not to E flat. So.
Here's A minor, here's F minor. So when you put them together, and you can hear the fact that there's a logic to it,
Yeah.
but it doesn't. There's something wrong, but it's consistently wrong. So the brain hears a pattern. And I'm just doing the first 5 notes of the scale, but Bartok actually thought this out pretty well. He has some very interesting. So that's called bitonality or bimodality, that you have something going on with two different tonal centers. So that was another idea of how we can make music modern. They started in the 20th century to look at everything. So rhythm and meter, the bottom of the page, syncopation. On page 406. There's a little excerpt from Stravinsky's Rite of Spring. Stravinsky said he didn't really have a theory for this. He did it pretty much by ear, sitting at a piano. So, which would be one take, two take, one take, two take. But he puts these accents in, and so the listener is not feeling 2/4. And we could say that the bass clef is an F flat triad, F flat, A flat, C flat, and the right hand is an E flat, dominant seventh built on an E flat, G, B flat, B flat. Or we could try to figure out like a 9th or 11th or something. But Stravinsky himself said, no, I wasn't really thinking of that as anything in particular. I just experimented until I got a sound I like. And it is a really good sound. This is the piece that John Williams based Jaws on, Rite of Spring. So, but as I mentioned in the Thursday class, when we got to where we were trying to play rhythms with where the meter kept shifting, they got this from the medieval times and the Renaissance. This is not really new, it's very, very old. So if you look at page 407, there's a John Dowland piece, and Dowland did not use bar lines. So you put a stress wherever you would speak the stress. Can she excuse my wrongs with virtue's cloak? So you would not say, can she excuse my wrongs with virtue's cloak? But you would just follow the natural speech. Can she excuse my wrongs with virtue's cloak? So we might draw a bar line before every accent, but then we would notice it goes from a 3/4 to a 2/4, and well, they do it here in letter B. So, can she excuse my wrongs with virtue's cloak? So, in effect, back in the 16th century, Dowland was changing meters quite often, except they didn't have the concept of meter. It was just coming out that way. Nowadays, now that we have a concept of meter, we have to keep changing it to get it to fit this. If you look at